Son, we're looking for the maniac.
Have you seen this man?
Well, another year has passed and I still haven't managed to do something interesting in my life. I mean, I still have nothing really to show for. In summer I did not have my Jet 2 holiday or went to a Coldplay concert. The only thing I can somewhat be proud of is the list of games I beat in 2025. In my last video I've only talked about games that people would consider retro, but this time I also played a few games that would fall under the modern category. So we got plenty of games to talk about, so without further ado, let's go! Okay, quick note. In this video I just want to share my experience playing and finishing the games I'm going to show. This is not meant to be a full in-depth review of every single game. Also, even though I try to avoid spoilers, there might be some in case you haven't played the games yourself. And by the way, if you like this kind of content, I'd really appreciate a like and if you subscribe to my channel. Tales of Phantasia. Back when I was in middle school, I had one classmate who was going to visit his family in Poland for a summer break and who was nice enough to let me borrow his Nintendo Wii. It was really nice, because I mainly wanted to play Monster Hunter Tri at the time, but then another friend told me, "Hey, you have a Nintendo Wii right now, correct? Would you like to check out this GameCube game?" And I was like, sure, why not? And the game she let me play was Tales of Symphonia. I didn't know what to expect, because as you might know from my other videos, I only played fighting and Sonic games on handhelds back in the day. Playing Tales of Symphonia during that summer break is a memory I really hold dear to my heart. And it also let me play the sequel, Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World, in co-op with that friend who lent me the first game years later. To be honest, I've never finished any other Tales game since then. I only tried some of the DS titles, but they didn't get me as hooked as Tales of Symphonia back then. For some reason I felt nostalgic and wanted to play another Tales title. So I thought, why not try the very first one, Tales of Phantasia. To be fair, I have already tried this game before, but it was in a time in which I didn't really commit to beating games and just played it more as a tourist. I played it on my very first Android emulation handheld, the JXD S5110P, but this time I played it on my Mio Mini Plus. The plot is pretty simple. We have our typical loud, strong and ambitious character Cress. Well, he is too happy, so he needs some trauma, and guess what? His whole family gets unalived, making him seek revenge. But of course the story is much bigger than that, because we already know we have a big, bad, evil, in this case the Demon King Daos, that wants to destroy mankind. Then Cress finds allies to form a hero party to fight Daos and save the world! Okay, I admit, my shortened and superficial synopsis does not bring justice to the game's story. Because the characters have their individual goals, experience hardships and overcome not only enemies but also themselves to grow. The thing that was not so magical was the story. I know what you're thinking, you're right, just a minute ago I told you that the story is nice with all those characters and it's big, etc. But well, it's a bit too big. The story unnecessarily drags on too many times. There are multiple times in which you face Daos, and I think it would have been better to cut off some parts. Because, summed up, the game loop is to find the elemental spirits, form a pact with each one, then they give you the power to reach Daos. Then defeat Daos. But after defeating Daos, in the middle of the game he just goes psych and runs off somewhere, and then the whole cycle starts anew. But slightly different. Yes, there are some more intricacies. And then it allowed for more room to develop characters. But just rinse and repeating the game loop again felt a bit cheap to me. But I don't want it to end on a nagging note, because I wanted to share my personal magical moment during my playthrough. It was the homeland of the elves, Emir Forest. When I found out that the map layout of that location was pretty much one-to-one to the Elven Forest and Tales of Symphonia, my head pretty much exploded. It felt so nostalgic and somehow heartwarming. Also, the story about Archie and her mother were really touching, because in Tales of Symphonia, the whole full elf, half elf theme plays a huge role. It felt like watching Better Call Saul and then years later Breaking Bad, not knowing it is the prequel. Or in other words, that feeling of surprise knowing the present and then learning about the origins in the past was what George Lucas intended when creating episodes 1 to 3 of Star Wars. Overall, I mostly enjoyed Tales of Symphonia. Well, let's say from my 53 hours of gameplay, it could have been shortened to around 30 to make it a tighter experience. However, as a fan of Tales of Symphonia, it was really nice to experience the original progenitor version. By the way, I recommend the PS1 version, because it has the most beautiful visuals. So now from a JRPG with action combat that gets interrupted whenever spells are cast on the PS1, to an action RPG with action combat that is quite monotone on the GBA. Yes, you heard correctly, the Game Boy Advance. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. So I have to be honest, I've never played any of the Baldur's Gate games before. I'm well aware that Baldur's Gate 3 was a huge success, but while everyone was raving about that game, I was here playing its GBA ancestor. And well, I have to say, overall I think this game was a brave attempt on bringing the Diablo formula of dungeon crawling, slaying hordes of enemies, and dishing out ginormous damage with your character's abilities. But in the end, in my opinion, the result was just lacking. Don't get me wrong, I think graphically it looks great. It has this top-down view of a 2.5D-ish render graphic, and the maps feel pretty big and kinda interconnected. For example, in the beginning you'll start in a town, and it feels open-world-esque, but just smaller. But nonetheless, it still looks great today, in my opinion. And also combat is technically not too bad, but very monotone. One gameplay mechanic that makes Diablo and other similar games like Torchlight and Titan Quest interesting are the classes and abilities that lead to different playing styles. Well, I played as an archer and the skills never got really exciting, so I resorted to melee weapons to save arrows. In my opinion, it was overall smarter to level up the general stats instead of the abilities, and in the end I just resorted to a hit and run technique. Because I've noticed that enemies inside dungeons do have a certain area in which they stay. Meaning, I often went to enemies, hit them, ran outside out of their area, and in best case they were somewhat stuck at the border and I basically cheesed them that way. These things I think were still sufferable, because they were just the result of the lower spec hardware of the GBA. But there were two super disappointing things I need to mention. First, looting was no fun at all. I don't remember finding armor or equipment in a dungeon or even after defeating bosses that was significantly better than the stuff you could buy in stores. And then in the end, after defeating the final boss, the cutscenes are just stills and text. Even after the cutscenes, the game just goes back to the title screen and you can only choose New Game or Continue Last Save Point. I don't know if there's like a New Game Plus or at least some sort of perk for finishing the game. Well, overall, I think I've spent maybe like over 10 hours playing this game. However, it felt more like 20, but not in a positive way. After playing Baldur's Gate, I wanted to get away from action and fighting games. I wanted to play something that had a cool narrative, a cool story, and that was cinematic. So I decided to play a hidden gem of the cinema game virtuoso himself, Hideo Kojima. Snatcher. Man, I have to admit that I was impressed with this one. But first things first. In case you don't know, the creator of Snatcher is Quentin Tarantino's footlover friend who also created the two video game epics Metal Gear Solid Cake and the Delivery Man Simulator. To be honest, I've never played those games, but was always intrigued, since they're infamous for their cinematic cutscenes. Snatcher is heavily inspired by the Blade Runner. It is set in a fictional cyberpunk era of Neo Kobe, and the dangers are the so-called Snatcher, biomechanical androids that try to copy the appearance of real humans to get rid of them and finally replace them. You play as Gillian Seed, who was newly recruited by the Junkers, a special police-adjacent force dedicated to combat and investigate the Snatchers. Gillian's partner is a little robot called Metal Gear that reminds me of Claptrap from Borderlands, because it can also talk and has this quirky humor. The gameplay is more like a visual novel, I'd say, and the art style has this more old-school, mature anime style which I really like. By the way, I've played the Sega Mega Drive CD version. You go around looking for clues, question people, search up stuff on computers, etc. But sometimes there are some more action gameplay mechanics. Well, there is one. Gillian does have a handgun, or more specifically a blaster. In some parts of the game, you'll need to complete shooting levels, in which the screen gets divided into a 3x3 grid and you move the cursor with your D-pad and fire with your shoot button. It took me some practice to get used to, but it's quite manageable, even though in the later acts of the game those shooting levels get quite challenging. The game definitely features the weirdo Japano susness, because there is this one character, Katrina, who is the daughter of your colleague and also a model. In the Western version, her age was set to 18, but in the Japanese version...
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?
Knowing that, some parts and scenes of the game become super sus. The story is really cool and has many twists. In the beginning they are pretty predictable, at least that was my opinion. But in the end of Act 3 everything becomes super weird. I really don't know how I feel about it. On one hand, it's pretty cool that I got presented with something that I would have never anticipated. But on the other hand, it's so out of the box, it feels pretty bogus. But maybe this type of unpredictable loco storytelling laid down the fundamentals of Kojima's interactive movies. I'd say at some point we shouldn't call his works games anymore. But overall, if you like visual novels and cyberpunk detective noir stories, you should definitely check Snatcher out if you get the chance. After being so dumbfounded by the plot twists of Snatcher, I thought, how about playing a super familiar game but with a twist? Pokemon Fire Red Team Rocket Edition. So it was the time for me again. Time to play a Pokemon game. You all know the Pokemon plot. Be some random 10-year-old kid, get your first Pokemon, travel, earn gym badges, slap an evil organization all by yourself, because apparently the police and adults in general are totally incompetent, and then become the champion and be the best no one ever was. But in this game, how about you don't play the story from the perspective of the 10-year-old kid, but from one of the grunts that got their behinds whooped by that sad kid? That is pretty much the story of this ROM hack of Pokemon Fire Red. You start out as a Team Rocket grunt who tries to climb up the corporate ladder of Team Rocket, while at the same time Red, the infamous soon-to-be Kanto Pokemon champion, follows his journey. However, canonical events still stay the same. For example, you first encounter Red in Mount Moon when trying to steal the fossils. In the very first encounter, Red is so immensely overpowered that his chameleon burns the living Solgaleo out of you. Playing as a Team Rocket grunt in Fire Red introduces a new game mechanic. After defeating a Pokemon trainer, you can steal one of their Pokemon. However, stealing Pokemon will have consequences. Every time you steal a Pokemon from a trainer, your Team Rocket rank rises, which will allow you to steal Pokemon from higher level trainers, and you can fetch rewards in the Team Rocket headquarters. However, it will also have negative effects, because along with your rocket rank, your bounty rises. And at a certain point, if your bounty exceeds a certain threshold, the Pokemarts will refuse offering you service, which means you can't buy items from them anymore. This was really annoying in my playthrough because I couldn't buy healing items anymore. I mean, I could still buy sodas from the vending machine, but other stuff was also needed. Luckily, there is a way to lower your bounty. In every city there is a police officer which lowers your bounty by either A. Offering him a Pokemon. The bounty will be lowered depending on the level of the Pokemon you offered. Or B. Just simply bribe them with money. I went with the latter, but to get all that money, because yes, I stole plenty of Pokemon in my playthrough, I used the pickup strategy. Get a team of 5 Meowths, which all have the pickup ability and have a strong Pokemon in the front of your party. Then one-shot random Pokemon and after some battles check your party. Maybe they carry TMs, PP-ups or even nuggets you can sell for quite some money. Even though this was probably the most efficient method, it still took me hours to lower my bounty. Nonetheless, I think it was worth it, because this Pokemon ROM hack is a very unique approach to the well-known Kanto saga. It incorporates plenty of fan theories, for example about Mewtwo's creation, and much more, which I don't feel like spoiling right now. Definitely check it out if you're a Pokemon fan and if you're a fan of the Kanto saga. After finishing the game, I was longing for something completely different, something that people would not mistake for something similar. You're right. Digimon Adventure. This playthrough was really dear to me, because this game pretty much retells the story of the first Digimon Adventure season, but with JRPG elements. Even though Digimon Adventure Season 1 is not my favorite season, Season 3 Supremacy, it was still my, and probably plenty of other kids of my generation, introduction to the franchise. The game does a great job of conveying the vibe of the original anime. The missions are divided in episodes which retell the plot of the anime in a more condensed form. The gameplay is a straightforward JRPG. For each episode you set a team out of 3 Digidestined and their Digimon partners. You party fights as a group in turn-based battles, which in these games I don't even mind, though I'm usually not a fan of those kinds of battles. The battles are fairly quick, so you don't have to wait for too long, unlike some other games. What I also love about this game is that there are no random encounters. You can see the hostile Digimon roaming around. And then of course, if you bump into their back, you'll get the first strike in battle. If they bump into your rear, they can attack first. I always love it when RPGs do that. Overall, the battles are okay, but some bosses were apparently immune to status effects, which boiled some fights just down to a DPS race, which is disappointing, but you mainly play this game for the plot anyways. This game also has some extras, which are really cool. For example, I always thought it was quite disappointing that only Agumon and Gabumon reached the perfect level, or Mega level, for Westerners. But if you fulfill some requirements in the game, you can actually unlock the perfect level for all Digidestined partners, which is super cool. Also, the post-game has some very exciting cameos. I'd say this game is a must for every true Digimon fan. Gargoyle's Quest. Gargoyle's Quest is in my opinion a super underrated gem. It is a prime example of a great blend of different game genres. Nowadays, I feel especially in the indie game scene, innovation comes from mixing and mashing different kinds of game genre and game mechanics. For example, Balatro is a blend of poker and roguelike. Or Dave the Diver is a blend of diving action / adventure with Metroidvania-light elements, and restaurant / management simulation. And Gargoyle's Quest also did that. Much earlier. It's a genre blend of old school RPG and action platformer. You play as Firebrand, a gargoyle who attempts to save his homeland, the Ghoul Realm, from an invading force called the Destroyers. You set out and move around in a JRPG typical top-down view overworld. Once you hit certain areas, the game transitions into a 2D side view platformer, in which Firebrand has to reach the end of the level. Also, there are random encounters, where you fight enemies in a side view arena. Firebrand can shoot projectiles to attack and fly / hover in the air for a set amount of time. The hover duration is determined by a stamina bar. You can also land on walls, which recovers that stamina bar. All these features grant Firebrand some nice mobility throughout the platformer passages. But, oh boy, the platformer passages do get harder and much more challenging later on. I have to admit that I've used save states later on to not just rage quit. In general, from a modern perspective, save states are a must in this game, because this is one of those old games which did not have a save function yet. You only were told passwords by some NPC in each village. The only gripe I have about this game, besides the frustrating platforming difficulty later on, is the super cryptic options in inventory UI. I didn't know how to heal or change weapons until the second half of the game. but overall the game is super fun and also the soundtrack. The OST of the first platforming stage could be a Castlevania tune. And if you didn't know, I really dig those classical and baroque video game tunes. Bright Memory Infinite. So for last year I wanted to play some sort of shooter, which resulted in me playing Star Fox on the SNES. This time I wanted to play a first-person shooter and something to test out my Anbenic RG406H. Luckily I found out about Bright Memory Infinite, an action-packed sci-fi shooter that is also available on Android. I usually don't really play FPS games, but once in a while I get the urge to pick up a gun and say hello to my little friend! You play as Shelia Tan, a special agent of the Supernatural Science Research Organization, SRO. And there are some bad guys you have to shut down. The enemies have this feudal Japan but futuristic style, which is really cool. For an Android game, the graphics are surprisingly high quality, except for the faces. They look pretty lifeless. Shelia fights with different guns, each with a special type of ammunition that can be upgraded, or her blade, through several skills. Also important, of course, is the parry mechanic in the game. The time window is fairly big, so it's easy to time. I'm sure speedrunners or veterans know how to exploit it. I'm no FPS expert, but to me the controls felt snappy and fluid. The game also ran really well on the RG406H, even though the fan had to power through in some levels. But during gaming, the comfortable sticks of the device make it a very great experience. Also, the game really does not overstay its welcome. It roughly lasts around 2 hours, but I played it on the violent difficulty, which is the very first one. After all that shooter action, I felt I had to go back to violence induced by feet and fists. Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure. This is the perfect Dragon Ball game to play on the go. At least it was for me. Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure is a fun side-scrolling action beat-em-up that doesn't take too much time to beat and is also not too difficult. It follows the story of Dragon Ball OG until the battle against King Piccolo pretty faithfully. The side-scroller passages are overall pretty fun, but sometimes the platforming can be a bit mean. For example, some enemies are placed right around pitfalls, so that you fall and immediately die when you try to jump and accidentally hit them. Then there are also boss fights, for example against Prince Pilaf and his ghouls, but also one-on-one fights. Those fights are more in the style of fighting games, like Tekken and Street Fighter, in which Goku and his opponents have bigger life bars. In one-on-one fights you can kick your opponent into the air to launch an air combo. It looks pretty cool, but can also be a bit too easily exploited. So the one-on-one fights are also not too much of a challenge. Also thanks to me playing it on my Mio Mini, the X and Y buttons were mapped as turbo buttons for A and B. Normally, punch is B, and the Y button is a turbo button for B, meaning you will punch with a higher frequency. Meaning you can easily chain your strikes for the combo, meaning the game is easier to beat. But to be honest, I just played on regular difficulty. Maybe on hard everything is super challenging. In my opinion, even if you're not a hardcore Dragon Ball fan but enjoy playing side-scrolling action platformers, you might still enjoy this game. For the next game, I have to be honest and say I haven't finished it in 2025, but on January 4th, 2026. But I really want to include this game into my list. Okay, I haven't finished this game in 2025, and it's also not a retro game. I guess I'm a total fraud. Boo! Well, it's my list, so I make the rules. Anyways, I want to say up front I'm a huge Dark Souls fan. I've played every title in the trilogy at least once. Dark Souls 1 I've played by far the most. So I knew what kind of pain and torture would await me when booting up Bloodborne. Shout out to my friend Minty, he was the one who let me actually still borrow his PS4 just for me to play Bloodborne. I think I started playing Bloodborne sometime in 2024. I specifically took some time off from work just to play it, but was stuck at a boss fight when my off days ended. After that, I didn't find the time to continue playing Bloodborne again until the Christmas holidays of 2025. Well, first things first, the story. Okay, well, as for pretty much every Souls game, I don't really understand the complete story. I have yet to watch dozens of Vatividia videos on YouTube to get at least some idea of what the story is about. But that's the thing with those Soulsborne ring games. They will explain some of the story with the cutscenes, but the true lore lies within the item descriptions and environment. So you have to puzzle together the lore behind the game yourself. Visually, Bloodborne is set in a fictional Victorian-looking world, which is a really cool theme, but I have to admit in the beginning especially everything looks like a brown and greyish blob. Bloodborne follows the typical Soulsborne structure. You are some random person fighting the way through a grotesque-looking world. You fight monsters and receive some sort of currency. In Bloodborne they're called blood echoes. You'll find bosses you'll need to defeat, slay as it's called in the game, and then at some sort of hub, you have a location where you level up and can buy equipment and some sort of armor and weapons. And you use the blood echoes to pay for them. If you get unalived, you lose your blood echoes, but at the location of your last life presence, you'll be able to recollect your lost blood echoes again. But if you get sent to the Shadow Realm again, the lost blood echoes on that location are forever gone. So it can be a very punishing game. And what exactly makes this and the other Souls games so appealing, you might ask? Well, for me it's the mix between going through hell just to get a glimpse of the feeling of finding salvation, and then just doing it over and over again. At a birthday party there was one guy who said, those Soulsborne games are not hard, they just have a distinct way of playing them and the player has to learn that. Well, I believe he just made a very poor choice of words, because in my opinion, Soulsborne games are hard indeed. It takes time and skill to master the mechanics, and each boss fight is some sort of test of how well you learned and mastered the game's battle mechanics. If you're a more aggressive player, then Bloodborne is just for you, because you don't really have shields and there is the special fighting mechanic, which rewards you for playing more risky, by giving a time frame in which you can recover lost HP by landing hits on the enemy. If you get hit again, that amount of damage you could have recovered gets lost. I have to say, I've learned about myself that I'm more of a slower fighter. That's why I would have appreciated a shield. And also I really missed using a bow in this game. Because A, yes, I'm a cheese lover. Just finding ways to exploit enemies makes me super happy, and B, there are moments in the game in which long distance weapons would have been so helpful. But overall it was still really fun, even though it cost me plenty of nerves to finish the game. There's nothing more disappointing and demotivating than playing a whole session fighting the same boss over and over again for hours, and then just calling it quits for a day without any progress. I've had this for some bosses in the game, which got me really frustrated and mad at myself. But I always knew that no matter how hard the enemy seems, no matter how many tries it would take me, if I just continue to give it my all, I will most certainly. Ja! Oh mein Gott, wenn mich das ja auch noch gekillt hätte. Alter! Alter! Oh mein Gott. Oh mein Gott. Oh mein Gott. So this was my list of games I finished in 2025. With a +1. What games did you finish last year? And what games are you planning to play this year or even are playing currently? For me, I'm currently playing Chrono Trigger on my TrimUI Smart Pro. FYI, the TrimUI Smart Pro with Next UI is my favorite EDC handheld right now, but that's maybe for another video. I'm playing Chrono Trigger because I've listened to a very cool German podcast that took great influence in my choice to either play Terranigma or Chrono Trigger. And when a friend of mine recommended me to play Chrono Trigger, I was determined to play it. Anyways, if you were entertained watching this video, I'd really appreciate it if you liked this video. And if you enjoy listening to me rambling about the stuff I like, then subscribe to this channel. I'll give my best to release more videos starting 2026. Okay, that's all. Thank you. Bye. Yes! Okay.
Oh yeah. Das,
Ja, das war cool,
sehr gut,
oder?
sehr gut.
Cool gespielt.
Ja,
oder?
cool. Ja.
Oh Gott, okay, wow. Boah, aber es hat sich irgendwie echt, also ab einem bestimmten Punkt weiß man so, oh, ich glaube, ich hab's, ne? So. Boah.
Ja,
Aber willst ja
wobei
nicht jinxen, ich wollte es auch nicht aussprechen so, aber ja. Alter.